We are back, and in this week's video, I'm going to show you guys how to make plates. Now, these plates were not made by me. They were actually bought from a store, but you can basically make your own, and you can have a foot on it if you want, or it could be subtle, or you can have no foot. You can have it straight-walled, or you can have it flared out, or you can have the more contemporary style where it's a normal-looking plate. And so in this video, I'm going to show you guys how to do it in 3 different ways, starting off with beginner, and moving on to intermediate, and finally the advanced. Alright, let's go ahead and get started. Alright, method number 2. We're not going to use the rolling pin to compress, and we're just using only our hands. So let's get this centered and going. So follow all the same steps as the one prior, but this time we have to center it well and not leave it slightly uncentered. So seal the edge, push down, and then cone up and down. Alright, so I got my centered piece, and now in order to push it down, there's a few ways to do it. You're doing it just with your hands and the sponge. So one way is you just do the karate chop, and what you do is you start the pressure in the center, and then you slowly bring your hands outwards, and then you tilt your right hand upwards to make it slope. Then you get your sponge, and then you compress that clay down and into the vat. And you keep repeating that until this gets wider and wider. So once again, do the karate chop method, apply downwards pressure with your right hand, and slowly bring it outwards to compress. So this will take a little time, and your left hand is there to apply light inwards pressure so that this doesn't get off center. Okay. The next method is same concept, but instead of interlocking, you're just basically pushing down. So you don't really need to support with this side if you don't want to. And I call this the hammer push. So you just take your right hand or left, doesn't matter. You apply downwards pressure in the middle, and then you just bring your hand outwards. And this best works when the clay is a little more on the flatter side. And you got to make sure that your clay is wet. So it works with both hands if you want. And like I said, I call this the hammer compression. You're basically making your fist into a hammer and applying downwards pressure. Okay, you can do a hybrid hammer where it's kind of like the karate chop, but you just push down and you bring it out. But I know I usually have shakiness as I do that, so that's why I do want to do the hammer with both hands, or one hand compressing against the other. And the benefit of doing it with your hands versus the rolling pin, this aligns the particles much better than the rolling pin because you're forking from the center and moving the clay outwards. So the chances of you having S-cracks or warping are a little less. Now it does take a little more time, it does take a little more patience because you're constantly going and pushing down and moving your hands outwards. But with a little patience and practice, you can more or less get the same feel, and it does have a little more of a hand-thrown effect because you create these spirals. So I have my 8-inch disc, and I'm going to go a little thinner. So you could keep using your hammer and pulling out, but I rather use a sponge on my fingers and do a little more of a finesse opening. So I'm going to apply downwards pressure with my right hand and then slowly move it outwards towards the clay wall. So this will do 2 things. It helps realign the particles even more, and it's starting to push the clay outwards towards the wall so you have some clay to work with. So just a little bit. And then at this method, you could grab your wooden knife, create the groove at the base, cut, lift, and then shape. You could use the sponge and push in and make it rise, and then thin it out and shape. Or you could keep applying downwards pressure in the middle and moving it outwards to develop a wall, push, and then shape. So there are a few ways to get the plate. Now you can see from the overhead camera that this is slightly off center. So if I wanted to, I could cut that off as well. So I have a nice centered piece and then pull. But to show you, if it's not that off centered, as long as you take your sponge on the outside and really compress downwards, and then you compress inwards, you can make that wobble more or less melt away. I wanted to push it in because I didn't want to lose too much clay. So now I'm going to push outwards from the inside. So a combination of the two. So pushing the clay out And now I'm going to start thinning the wall. So I'm going to push in and squeeze with my pointer finger. So this is a hybrid of the push in from the outside. So that's why this is the intermediate version, adding a little more technical steps. Compressing the bottom. And then basically keep thinning the clay wall until I have the style and thickness that I want. If you want to see more ceramic videos, don't forget to like and subscribe. That way it helps grow the channel and you'll be able to see these videos as they're released every week. Okay, so I'm going to go a little thinner. And I'm going to have this a split between slightly modern and slightly contemporary. So I'm not going to have a plate edge. I'm going to have a slight roundness here. And I'm going to cut this just a tad bit because it is a little unlevel. So before I do that, I do want to compress the center with my rib because I can feel some high and lows. So just compressing the middle, very similar to trimming. So when I compress the middle with this tool, I'm basically using this long straight edge, applying pressure with this tool angled towards my body and pushing down. And this will remove any unwanted heights and compress it evenly. All right, so at this stage, I basically round my rim, and then that's basically my plate. But before I do that, I want to show you something that you could do and play around with. So once you have your plate formed, it's really easy to manipulate this. So kind of recapping on the first plate, you basically just take your hands and compress the clay, and you can move it out and move it in. And as long as you're doing it with the wheel spinning and you go nice and slow, and you're supporting where you need to, you can manipulate this plate to whatever shape you want. You just got to make sure that the rim doesn't get too thin, so it is good to compress the rim as you do this, and that helps realign the particles and make sure that the clay doesn't get too messy. So actually I'm going to go back to that original shape because I like that one. So it has kind of like a platter plate feel. It's a little deeper. If I don't like this later, I can always cut this off, but I'm going to keep it like that. And then get ready to cut it off of the wheel. So I'm going to use the chamois. Create the groove at the base. And then wire. So the exact same steps. All right, so that was plate number 2. A slightly more advanced method. And I'll just clean this up so when I cover it in my bag, my bag doesn't get all clayed and dirtied. And let's start the last one. All right, method number 3. We're going to use a 3-pound ball of clay, and we're not compressing it down all the way with our hands to make a flat disc. We're going to basically throw a normal cylinder, and then we're going to pull the clay outwards with our hands. So this is the way that my teacher in high school taught me how to make plates. And when I saw it, I was like, oh my God, how do you do that? I don't understand. And so I never really threw plates because that method just was a little too advanced for me when I was learning. And so now that I understand it, I can show you guys, and then you can pick and choose which one you'd rather do. So always same steps apply, push it down, cone up and down until it's centered. And the difference with this method is we are actually digging your well like you normally would for a bowl or a vase. Okay, so the setup, you would want this a little wider for this method, but a narrow method can work as well. And so I'm going to dig my well like I normally would. And you must be thinking, like, how am I going to transform this tall cylinder into a plate? And I will show you. So depth-wise, like I said, if you're going to trim a foot, about no thinner than 1/2 inch. If you're not going to trim a foot, you can go a little deeper. But because this is a larger amount of clay, it's going to be wider. I do want it thicker to begin with, so 1/2 inch would be my thinness. And I can make it a little thicker if I want, because you can always go thinner. But if you go too thin, you can't really make it thicker. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and open my well. So that same pinch and pull and squeeze So going back to those advanced opening methods that I have been showing you folks in the other videos. So if you really want to deep dive into that technique, let me know in the comments if you want to have a in-depth tutorial on how to open. And this is the basic setup. So I have my cylinder, and now I'm ready to actually compress this down into the clay and pull it outwards. So to do this compression and pull, you basically will take one hand, this wraps over the clay at 6 o'clock, and then your other hand wraps over this hand. You apply downwards pressure with this side of the top hand, so you tilt, and then you pull towards your body. You could also use your left hand to apply downwards pressure, right hand on top, tilt, and pull outwards. So whichever hand you're the most comfortable with is the one you're going to want touching the clay. In this case, I'm the most comfortable with my right hand touching in this method. My left hand will go on top. So I'm going to apply downward pressure with this part, and the sponge is here just to make sure that the clay stays slick. So I'm holding it in my palm, the clay is touching the sponge, and this part of my hand is touching the clay. And then I just apply downwards pressure, and then my left hand, sorry, is applying guidance. So I'm just pushing down, and then I'm pulling that clay outwards. Okay, it's starting to mushroom out, so with a little more of a compression. So this time I'm not going to use a sponge, so I can really feel the clay. So really compress. A little bit of the clay got away with me, and now I'm going to open and pull. Okay, I got my disc. And now I'm just going to go ahead and compress and pull. All right, so that compression and pull, I switched. So this hand was applying downwards pressure to compress, and my left hand was actually pulling the clay out. So it looks something like this on the inside. So I compress, and now my right hand is acting as the guide. My left hand is applying downwards pressure with the sponge. So what I'm doing now is I'm distributing the clay from the middle, and I'm moving it outwards towards my clay wall. So I have more clay to work with for this platter. And normally when you do that, you're going to notice some high and low spots. Like right here is low, this is high, then it goes back to low. So you're going to have to do this a few times, and usually with the rib will help to finish it off. So as soon as I passed the middle, that edge started lifting up. And that's fine because it's natural. The clay has to go somewhere, and if you don't compress the middle as you open upwards, it's going to go back. Okay. So right here is my lowest point. So before I do anything else, I'm going to do one more compression with my fingers now, and this I'm compressing the middle as I pass through it so that that part doesn't rise. So this is another way to move the clay outwards. So I have this weird bump in the middle. So now I'm going to use my sponge to then finally push that whole thing out. You can see that wave of clay merge with the outside. And I'm going to do one compression with the rib. So I always recommend compressing the middle. This helps prevent any S-cracks from forming during the drying process. Now it's not 100% effective. S-cracks can still appear, but this will make it less apparent. All right, so that's pretty much set up in the middle. We have about a ½ an inch in the center, and then it goes out a little thinner towards the outside. Oh, even less. This is about 3/8, almost a quarter. So that's actually better in this case because I am going to attach a foot to this in the next video. So that means I got to thin out this section here. But like I said in the previous things, I am talking a lot about this, but you could keep it thicker, or you want to keep it thicker if you're trimming a foot. But because I don't want to trim away a lot of this clay, I'm going to attach a foot during the trimming process. So then I'm going to compress the middle one more time. There we go. And I have this nice sharp edge forming, and that will be where my clay wall begins. So I'll compress even more. Get rid of that little bump that formed. And now I'm going to play with this clay wall to get my rim to form. So to do that, I'm compressing this outwards and I'm pushing this inwards. So I'm squeezing both my fingers towards each other. If you want, you could drip the sponge over the rim. And you basically do this to get your clay wall so you can pull it. Now this was going to be more of a traditional platter, not the narrow base platter that I threw in one of my earlier videos, but this one's just going to be a wide base platter with a curved wall. So this part was more familiar to normal throwing. You're pinching the clay wall, letting it thin out, and then rise. So if you notice that your clay is not tall enough and you don't have enough to work with, you can push this wall inwards with your right hand, and that will naturally cause the clay to rise, and that will give you more clay to work with, which is never a bad thing, but the downside is you do lose some interior real estate space for your base. Okay, so I'm going to actually push that in a little more, and I'm going to do a pull. And because this wall is going to thin out, I'm going to keep the rim at the top a little thicker, so about 3/8 of an inch, because when I flare this, it will thin out. Okay, so that looks pretty good. So now we're entering almost bowl territory. So I'm going to flare this out. Before I flare, all this clay here, this skirt, I don't want to waste that, so I'm going to be pushing this in. So whenever you throw plates or bowl or platters, doing this helps you maximize the clay. So I'm basically pushing in, my left hand is then push out, and then I do a shape. So this will maximize the clay at the base so that I have clay to work with. So I'm pushing in, you see that bump form on the normal cam, and then I'm actually now going to push out and then do a curve up. So this is slightly more advanced technique, but this will maximize my clay. So now I'm doing a shaping, and then I am lifting up and then finishing it off. So that way I already have a curve forming, and I'll have less to trim at the bottom. And now for some shaping, so I can get this bigger and less tall, using my rib. This will match the size perfectly. Support underneath, because right here on the overhead camera, this is where my base ends and my wall begins. So I want to support it with my outside hand. So I'm going to apply pressure here, and I'm going to start expanding this and making this a little wider. And so you can transform this back into a very wide rimmed plate. So that's up to you, but I'm going to make this a little more of a platter. So kind of a hybrid, a platter plate. So I want a nice curve, so I'm going to add a little more curveness to the top of this. And you just got to be careful whenever you flare your bottom beyond the base. There's always chances of it collapsing. So just make sure your clay is not too wet. If it is, dry it out. And there we go, that's more or less the final shape. Now I'm just going to clean up the inside, maybe do another compression with the rib, and then clean up the rim. And it's good to check the height thicknesses, because as I'm doing this compression, I notice that this is taller than here. And you don't really want a low spot on the outside, because if you eat anything with sauces, it'll create a little moat there and all the sauces will get stuck. So I'm just basically compressing and removing any extra height that I don't need, so that it more or less matches the outside. The reason why it's kind of creating a trench here is because that's where my clay wall kind of transforms into, or my base transforms into my clay wall. So a few passes, and right there, that looks more or less flat. Clean it up with my my sponge. Okay. Still feels a little low here, so I'm just gonna start from here and actually move towards the center. Now some people say that this can misalign the clay because you're going opposite of where you moved it. But as long as you compress downwards after, I've never had an issue with cracking. As long as you don't go too much from the outside in. Right, let's adjust the rim. So I want to compress. Feels pretty level. Remove excess with the sponge. And then finalize with the chamois. Because this will be a serving dish, I don't want my rim too thin or it's prone to cracking. All right, lastly, let's get that subtle spiral in. Start from the center. And fade it out. Okay. And then depending on the glaze I choose, I can emphasize this, and let's go ahead and cut it off. There we go. Throwing a platter slash wide plate with 3 pounds of clay using the open and pull out technique. Thank you guys for watching the video and supporting this small channel. If you want to see more types of ceramic tutorials, don't forget to subscribe. That helps support the channel and grow. And with the growth, that allows me to produce more videos for you guys and more awesome ways to play with clay. Thank you again, and see you in the next video. Oh, and don't forget, next video, we're gonna go ahead and attach a foot to this during the trimming process. So if you haven't seen that before, definitely subscribe so you can see it done, and that will take your throwing to the next level. Have a good one. Thank you.